May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. John Gray was a constable, a police constable in the Edinburgh City Police. He took the night shift. And as he took the night shift, in those days, he was required to have a watchdog. He chose a Skye Terrier, whom he called Bobby. What else would you call a police dog? In October in 1857, the nights were cold and wet, and despite the autumn chill, Mr. Gray and his companion would patrol the streets of Edinburgh to keep the peace. Gray developed a nasty cough which would turn into TB. And he continued to get weaker and weaker as his health failed. He was buried in Greyfriars Kirkyard, the graveyard surrounding Greyfriars Kirk in the old town of Edinburgh. And Bobby spent 24 years in the graveyard mourning this man who had gone. The day after his burial, the dog was found lying on the freshly filled grave, and was thrown out of the graveyard by the man in charge because dogs weren't allowed in there. But Bobby got the last laugh, because when eventually he died, he was buried in the graveyard not far from when Gray had been born. He went to the last place that he'd seen the one he loved. He went to the last place where his master had been. And in a sense, Mary was doing that. I don't think Mary and the women really were thinking about what they were going to do when they got to the tomb, because there was a large stone in the way. Well, they thought there would be. But it was the last place they'd seen him before they had to go home. He was buried in a hurry because the night was coming, and it was about to be the Sabbath because, in God's eyes, and the Jews still follow it that way, the day begins when the sun goes down. So at about 6 o'clock, the sun would go down, and it was the Sabbath until 6 o'clock the next day, and next evening. And they daren't do anything on the Sabbath. And by the time the Sabbath was over, it was evening, and it would be dangerous to go out. So they go with the first chance they had, early on the Sunday morning, the first day of the week. And her cry is, they've taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they've laid him. Suddenly, everything that she was clinging on to desperately was gone. She'd been following him, and I suppose she and the disciples would have thought to themselves, this would never end. Because Jesus was teaching and preaching, he was healing, he was transforming people's lives. And they'd had a good 3 years. Some disciples had followed and then gone away, but people like Mary had stayed with him. And then come the events of Good Friday and Maundy Thursday. And her whole world has fallen apart. And she just wants to cling to this one thing. She's desperate. And even that is taken away. I don't know if you've ever felt a feeling, or feel you felt a feeling that bad. It can come in all sorts of ways, but it often comes when we lose someone we care about. And we feel the need to keep some connection with them. When I go back to Ireland, I always go and see my mum and dad's grave. I know they're not there, I know they're in glory, but I still feel that connection when I go and stand there. And so would Mary. And then, well, she goes and tells the other disciples, and like they were, they run ahead. It's interesting that John, he talks about himself as the other disciple. He never really mentions himself by name. He's younger than Peter, and he gets to the tomb first, and he looks in. Peter lumbers up behind him, doesn't stop, goes into the tomb, and they see what's going on, and then they go home, and there's all that kerfuffle, and Mary's left standing there. He's gone, but there's just the tomb. And that's when the stupid questions come. Why are you crying? Well, they weren't stupid questions, but that's how she might have felt. You know, what's going on? Why are you crying? And she explains. Again, they've taken my Lord, and I don't know where they've laid him. What an awful feeling. Just when she thought she was at her lowest, it went lower again. There's a song that is sung by one of my favourite singers. It's one of the ones I'm not allowed to play in the car. His name's Machine Gun Kelly. And he writes this. Now tell me, how did all my dreams turn to nightmares, and how did I lose it when I was right there? Now I'm so far that it feels like it's all gone to pieces. Tell me why the world never fights fair. I'm trying to find home. A place where I can go to take this off my shoulders. Someone take me home. Someone take me home. I found no cure for the loneliness. I found no cure for the sickness. Nothing here feels like home. Crowded streets, but I'm all alone. And that's how Mary was. And you know, that's how many people are in our world. Yeah, crowded streets, but they're all alone. Something has happened. Something has changed in their lives, and they don't know where to turn. Or when they do turn to what they think might help, it fades away. That's how Mary was. And then one word changed her life forever. There she is, looking into the tomb, and there's these angels who are asking the stupid questions like, why are you crying? And then, as she talks to them and they talk to her, she hears behind her someone. And he too asks, why are you crying? And again, she has to explain herself. She thinks he's the gardener. She thinks perhaps he can do something about it. Well, he can, but not what she was expecting. She thinks he'll know what the answer is, where they've taken him. One of my favourite poets is a man called Malcolm Geet. He's an Anglican priest, and he writes this about this very thing. He blesses every love which weeps and grieves, and now he blesses hers who stood and wept, and would not be consoled or leave her love's last touching place, but watched as low light crept up from the east. A sound behind her stirs, a scatter of bright birdsong through the air. She turns but cannot focus through her tears, or recognize the gardener standing there. She hardly hears his gentle question, why are you weeping? Or sees the play of light that brightens as she chokes out her reply. They took my love away. My day is night. And then she hears her name. She hears love say, the word that turns her night and ours today. Mary. And suddenly all those things that had torn her apart, all those things that had made her feel empty and alone and useless, were gone. No longer did she want to know where they'd laid his body, because he was standing before them. And all that had been awful was right once more. He called her by name. and he calls us by name. In the middle of a world where perhaps personally, or perhaps as we look at the state of the world around us, we despair, he calls our name. He's conquered death. He's conquered that one thing that we think we cannot conquer, that is inevitable. What is it they say? There are two things that are inevitable: death and taxes. Well, some people try to escape the taxes, but and get into trouble for that. But he is the one who has conquered death. And it is no longer inevitable. On the cross, he paid the price for your sin and mine. For all those things that we know that we've done and are ashamed of, for all those things that we don't even notice, he paid the price. And then he rose from the dead. And as he rises from the dead, he proves that the price has been paid, that death has been conquered, and it is conquered for all those who put their trust in him. At the heart of everything is the cross of Christ, the empty cross and the empty tomb. Things will never be the same again. Oh, there's still pain and there's heartache and there's trouble, as there was for Mary, and people asking stupid questions and making silly comments that hurt and don't help. But he calls us by name. He knows us and he loves us and he cares about us more than we can ever begin to imagine. So when we think the end has come and the pain is just too much, that's when we need to listen and to hear him say, our name once more. Do we listen? I pray that we do. And that we find that in the midst of a world that is broken and troubled and painful and mystifying, that we cannot understand why people do what they do to each other. He is the one who took all that on himself and then rose from the dead to call us by name.